Malleus is a Boston, Massachusetts-based, let's call them a black metal band, a black heavy metal band, a black thrash band, an 80s extreme metal band. Uh, it's an interesting prospect from folks who, they kind of started out by putting out a demo or an EP, if you will, that it focused it definitely had influence from Celtic Frost, but we hadn't quite seen where they were going to take it in terms of earlier Bathory influence and thrash metal, speed metal, kind of kicking up into their sound, and we got more of that later on with the Night Raids EP or 7 inch, and that had some longer songs. It had, it did seem like they had taken closer study of what Venom actually was, what Bathory actually was, and so there were these 8 or 9 minute songs that they they um they said a whole lot, even though it was just a 7 inch. It's a pretty substantial record. So uh, considering the sort of hardcore punk background and some of the black metal bands that they're in otherwise, which are sort of lo-fi and for me kind of low calorie for black metal. But this definitely has a lot of conviction behind it. It feels like not only do they study or they just know inherently what is good about 80s extreme metal and extreme thrash and black thrash, but they found where they could insert themselves without just sounding like a bad Celtic Frost cover band. And my first point of hinging into this thing was hearing a little bit of Blood, Fire, Death and a little bit of Merciless, the first Merciless album. And from there, obviously, we get a little bit more standard black thrash. We do get some Celtic Frost riffs in there. We also get some of the more epic, striding 8-9 minute songs towards the end of the album on side B, which should speak to the inner Bathory fan if you are one, as I am. So ultimately, this one comes down to it really does come down to riffs, and the production values are pretty strong. The performances are all impressive. Um, the bass isn't quite as pronounced as I would always like in this type of music, but it serves the old kind of late 80s extreme metal feeling of it all. And, I'd appreciated that I could sit down with a black heavy metal album that feels like heavy metal 1 minute. It's got sort of a punkish hardcore punk feeling to it other times, and it also has some speed metal influence without making a cheesy gimmick of it. It all feels appropriately set in the, again, early, well, let's say mid to late 80s. I know I said it feels authentic enough while they put their own spin on it. And the lyrics are pretty interesting too. I think that anytime a band examines the hysteria of belief, the maniac side of people who lord their piety over others, um, and seek to control others through their moral convictions, are pretty interesting. But this album kind of goes a step further and considers the crowd and why the herd follows, why people are convinced to do terrible things to others. And maybe that's just part of one or two songs, but it's still pretty interesting for a black thrash metal band where most don't necessarily uh, think about or consider that kind of thing. So there are layers to why this is interesting beyond. It's a cool old school black thrash metal record with riffs, but I mean that is also part of it. So it was an easy thing to recommend, and a record that I found pretty easy to sit on repeat with and just enjoy. So yeah, go ahead and see if that's your kind of thing. There's a lot more details in the review, where I kind of a little bit more eloquently state what's up. So check that out, and there you go.